So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Raspberry Pi Foundation, what we do, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Raspberry Pi Foundation. But then I'm also going to talk briefly about something that I'm very passionate about, which is around how research can meet practice. So I'll start by talking about Raspberry Pi Foundation and why we've developed this partnership. So we've kind of alluded to this already. You know, as talked about the partnership that we've had over Isaac, we also have had Raspberry Pi itself, the little computer, came out of, researchers working in the University of Cambridge. On the Raspberry Pi side, we've had, we were formed in 2008. I don't know when the university was formed, hundreds of years ago. But it's been, for the last 10 years, really focused on building a community of educators, of learners, of volunteers around computing education, and has a mission to reach young people all over the world. So the partnership, we've got University of Cambridge, all this, it's amazing department with all the breadth of high quality research and expertise going on here. The ability to have PhD students, and then we've got Raspberry Pi Foundation, who have a community of teachers, educators, learners, and have been very active in computing education research. So between these two, we think it's a really perfect partnership. And to talk a little bit more about the Raspberry Pi Foundation, I've said we've got a mission to grow computing education and really to reach young people all over the world, and to support them in developing computing skills and digital making skills that will equip them for their life ahead. But we talk in the Raspberry Pi Foundation about having three sort of pillars, three ambitions around the work that we do: formal education, non-formal learning, and research. And if you can see on our website, that's part of our new strategy. So we've done a lot in the area of formal education, largely through the National Centre for Computing Education, but not only. We've developed a curriculum called the Teach Computing Curriculum. We have Isaac Computer Science, you can see there. We have online courses that are running on the Future Learn platform for teachers. And we have the magazines you've been seeing out there, the Hello World magazines. In the non-formal learning space, we have a project site where there is lots of projects for young people. We have competitions, Coolest Projects and AstroPi, and we have a global network of clubs for out-of-school learning, Coder Dojos and Coder Club. So we're doing a load of stuff. And this is the new bit. So now we've got this combination of University of Cambridge and Raspberry Pi Foundation, and I think it's a really good complement to the work that we've been doing. And very exciting, and I hope you're as exciting about as us. So that's my kind of first bit. But now I really wanted to talk about, what I started talking about in my introduction, was how important it is to ensure that computing education research, which is around teaching and learning, is rigorous and theoretical and all those things, but at the same time is designed with classroom practice and impact on learners and teachers right from the start. So computing education research for younger people is the sort of the poor relative of computing education research for big people, for older, which has been going for much longer. Computing education research itself is the poor relative of maths education research and science education research, which has been going for much longer. But if you compare it to sort of 5 years ago, there is more research coming up in this area. And I've put some of the areas on there. There is a dozen other sort of areas of research people are working in. And these are research areas that are very focused on young people learning computer science. But, do we actually know that any of this up here is actually impacting on teachers' lives? For a lot of teachers, I think that bringing this research into practice is quite a challenge, because you're too busy to read papers, and your school may have policies for the way that teaching happens, and it's sometimes difficult to be thinking about research. But there is another, and I like this this contrast here between the way educational research is. This is educational research on the left, the kind of knowledge that's generated by educational research, and then the sort of knowledge that teachers use when they're in the classroom. So on the left, we have, this is how researchers are judged. If I submit a paper to a journal, it's got to have 3 criteria at the bottom there: significance, originality, and rigour. Those are the things it's measured by. It has to be, it's often very narrowly focused on a particular area. Teachers, that's not the knowledge they use when they're teaching. They need to be, a teacher is thinking all the time, is adapting all the time, has to relate something to a context, has to think about all the different things going on in that classroom, not just the particular issue. So we have this kind of conflict between what the knowledge that researchers are generating and the pedagogical knowledge that teachers are using all the time. I've put the reference for that diagram. I think it's quite useful. So I'd like to think about research practice and how we can frame it using these 4 lenses, or 3 lenses really, and then the last one is a kind of a commitment that we're trying to make in this research centre. So, and think about, just hold in your head, that left side is the knowledge generated by educational research, and the right side is the knowledge that teachers use day by day. So one lens might be thinking about how we translate that. That's how we move the left to the right. So how do we move that knowledge on the left to the knowledge on the right? And then the second lens is how we go from right to left, how we think about what the needs, what teachers really need in order to be able to sort of teach at 9 o'clock on Monday, and then a different year group at 10 o'clock on Monday, and what teachers need. There's a bit of a supply and demand issue in educational research, and how that impacts on research. And the third issue is looking at both of those together and thinking, why aren't we, when we design our research projects, thinking about both of those things right from the beginning? And the fourth is our commitment. So let's start with the first one. So knowledge translation. Because this presentation is sort of framed by what Raspberry Pi Foundation are doing, the examples that I'm using are from the foundation. So knowledge translation is thinking about translating research so that it's actually accessible. So one of the issues that teachers, as a teacher, the issue I always had was time, and the lack of it, actually. The lack of time in order to prepare my lessons and mark everything, and I didn't really have time to read long research articles. So some sort of things we've been doing at Raspberry Pi Foundation is trying to make that easier. So we've developed, and we've got a large stream of work around developing what we call pedagogy quick reads, which are 2-page summaries of areas of research. So there's one on cognitive load, there's one on pair programming, and it's every sort of a 15-minute read on that topic and how teachers have been able to use it. And accompanying that are podcasts where teachers can talk about those topics. We've been looking at pedagogy across a whole range of research. Jane Waite, who is here, did for the Royal Society, I think it was 90-page report on all the pedagogy, the research on pedagogy. We've recently shrunk that down a little bit more, but it's still probably quite long for a teacher to read. And so we've worked on collaboratively with teachers to get that into 12 pedagogical principles, and they're underpinning the big book of computing pedagogy. So that's knowledge translation. Then we've got the other, that was, if you remember, that's the working from the left to the right. Second area is how do we work with the community, with this community in this room? How do we work with practitioners to be able to inform the design of our research, the evaluation of our research, the implementation of our research? So there is a structure that's become quite popular in the US, called research practice partnerships. This is where researchers and practitioners, teachers in schools and schools work together to develop a research idea. It's based on what's useful for your teaching. Now, I believe we really want to do something like that here in this research centre. It may be less formal, but that's our intent, to work very closely. And we've been trying to do it in a couple of ways. So I'll do them in reverse order because we just talked about the principles. So when we developed the 12 pedagogical principles, that was definitely in collaboration and through lots of iteration with lots of teachers and lots of all those things, sitting at computers, sitting on Zoom calls, sitting in conversations, one-to-one conversations, also visits to schools. So to get to those 12 pedagogical principles, that was very much a sort of teacher-driven activity. Another example is the work we've been doing in culturally responsive computing teaching, which hopefully you've seen a little bit about outside, and the work that's followed on from those guidelines. So we in order to develop those guidelines, we developed a working group of teachers and the Raspberry Pi team working on it were listeners. We were just listeners. We were hearing what a culture meant to teachers working in schools and what that meant to teachers. And in the next phase, the research we're working on now is to try and implement that. But again, we're going to support teachers working in their schools to hear from them what works and what doesn't work. So that's an example of number 2. Number 3 is the idea of designing research so that it actually is embedding research in the work that we do. So I've got an example here, which is the teacher computing curriculum, which is a set of, we've developed of 500 lessons all the way from 5 to 16, where that has lesson plans, teacher guides, PowerPoint presentations, homeworks, everything you might ever need, a journey that takes you all the way through from 5 to 16. But that is can be taken off the shelf or adapted by teachers, but the research is embedded in that. So what we've learned through the pedagogy, the study of pedagogy that we've done, is embedded in that, so that and then explained through the teacher guide. So that's how we're trying to do number 3. And that brings me to a sort of model that I quite like. So, and this came from organisational theory around knowledge mobilisation. Knowledge mobilisation is how knowledge reaches the practical world. So you've got these 3 areas. So what I've just talked about, we're embedding it into our materials. That's knowledge transfer. That's saying we know this works, we're going to embed it in our research, so you're going to get it directly. We've got translation, which I talked about with the pedagogy quick reads and the big book of computing pedagogy, where we're trying to make research accessible and easy to understand and sort of bite-sized. And then we've got knowledge transformation, which is, I think, where we need to do more work. And we're starting it a little bit with doing our culturally responsive computing teaching. But basically, that's, we want teachers, for teachers, for you in the room who are teachers, to be able to use the research in the way that you think is appropriate for your context, and to be able to interpret it and put it into practice where you think it works, adapt it where you think it needs it. And that's giving the reins over to the teacher in the area of research meeting practice. Now, I put this in a Venn diagram. That may not be right, maybe need to think about that more, but there might be some things that we can do that actually use all of those. So to finish with, that's my perspective, in sort of thinking about the strategy of the research centre. So I would just like to say that this is our commitment in trying to get research into practice. So number 1, we'll collaborate with schools and teachers at every point in designing, implementing, evaluating research projects. Secondly, we will not publish things we will always make our research, anything that we've got available, open access to everybody, not behind a paywall. And thirdly, we will make sure that if we have research findings, that we put them into practice through our own through the foundations programs or other activities, and in collaboration with the community that we're building here. So those are our 3 elements of our commitment, and that's me.